Two girls vanished while hiking on a remote trail, leaving their families desperate for answers. But weeks later, search teams make a discovery in the jungle, and what they find makes their blood run cold. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you're watching, because now I'm going to tell you how all this happened. This is not a story about tourists who came home with bright souvenirs and suntans. What followed would unsettle two countries and leave investigators staring at jungle maps for years. Yet on the morning of Tuesday, 11 March 2014, everything looked ordinary and hopeful for Chris Kremers, age 21, and Lisanne Froon, age 22. That day, the two friends walked across the cobblestones of Amersfoort, carrying freshly printed university diplomas and talking about a single idea. One last adventure before office desks and alarm clocks ruled their lives. Chris, meticulous since childhood, had already drawn a color-coded chart that stretched from gate numbers at Schiphol Airport to lesson times at a language school in Panama. Lisanne, taller and easygoing, checked her camera batteries and stuffed a pocket notebook with volleyball stickers for children she planned to coach. Each young woman promised anxious parents nightly messages and kept copies of insurance papers inside plastic sleeves. They believed that planning, more than luck, protected travelers. During the final week of March, they filled two medium backpacks. Chris folded lightweight shirts, rolled socks by color, and taped Spanish verb lists to the inside flap. Lisanne added instant coffee sachets, small Dutch stroopwafels, and a glass jar labeled Moments, ready to hold ticket stubs and bottle caps. On Friday, 28 March, they boarded an overnight flight from Amsterdam to Panama City, changing planes once in Bogota. The flight lasted roughly 14 hours. Through oval windows, they watched dawn paint the Caribbean Sea pale gold, unaware that those waters would one day be searched for clues with helicopters and infrared cameras. They reached Albrook Domestic Terminal on Saturday, 29 March, just after 3 in the afternoon local time. A turboprop carried them west, across the Cordillera Central to the highland town of David. From there, a shared minibus bounced for almost 1 hour along winding asphalt, until Boquete appeared, snug between coffee slopes and swirling fog. Altimeters on their phones read about 1,000 meters above sea level. Cool air smelled of wet earth and orange blossoms. Both friends felt they had stepped into a travel brochure. Sunday, 30th March, they settled into Casa de Familia Miranda, a simple guest house with blue shutters. The Dutch flag hung at the doorway in welcome. Their room held 2 pine beds, a fan, and a narrow desk where Chris lined up pens by ink color. Lisanne placed her camera on the sill facing Volcan Baru, the highest peak in the country. That evening they emailed families. Safe arrival. Fresh pineapple everywhere. Lessons start tomorrow. Spanish classes began Monday morning at 8. By the lunch bell, they could order empanadas without switching to English. Teachers praised their quick progress. Classmates from Canada and Chile invited them to salsa night. The friends instead walked to a small animal shelter, asking how to volunteer later. They photographed tiny puppies, the first pictures of hundreds that would later be studied frame by detectives. Across these early days, nothing signaled future trouble. The town was bright, the schedule clear, and their dreams seemed only an arm's reach away. The trail they would soon choose, however, waited silently beyond the last coffee field, already woven with cloud and mystery. Monday, 31st March 2014, dawned with thin mist sliding across the rooftops of Boquete. Chris, age 21, rose first, noted overnight rainfall in her pocket diary, and reviewed the week's color blocks. Spanish class ended at midday, leaving hours of light to explore. The pair strolled the narrow streets, accompanied by a lanky stray known locally as Blue. Residents often saw backpackers borrow the friendly animal for walks. The dog's presence added a sense of local approval to any outing. That afternoon, the friends visited a Dutch expatriate couple who owned a small organic farm on the town's edge. The conversation focused on volunteer tasks planned for mid-April, painting fences, coaching children in basic English, and helping with weekend sports events. Their hosts found the visitors attentive and organized, traits that later shaped every witness statement. Night fell cool and clear. At 1900 hours, Chris emailed her mother a short update, attaching 3 photographs: bright hibiscus blooms, Blue sitting by a fountain, and Lisanne grinning beside a wooden sign reading, Sendero El Pianista. This trail, less than 8 kilometers from the guest house, climbs sharply to a ridge marked by a weathered cross. Guidebooks describe the route to the cross as straightforward, yet they warn that continuing beyond leads into unmarked rainforest descending toward the Rio Culebra Basin. Maps rarely show that second section. Chris wrote only one line about it. Maybe we hike a little tomorrow. Weather looks good. Sunrise on Tuesday, 1st April arrived cloud-free. At 700 hours, the girls shared toast, papaya slices, and instant coffee. They chose light attire, sleeveless tops, quick-dry shorts, and sturdy, low-cut hiking shoes. A single blue day pack would hold essentials. Inside, they placed Lisanne's silver Canon PowerShot, both Samsung smartphones, 1/2-liter water bottle, 2 bananas, several wrapped cookies, and a basic first aid pouch. Heavy boots, rain jackets, passports, and most cash remained in their room, a decision reflecting confidence in a short daytime excursion. Shortly after 1000 hours, a local taxi, its license number later recorded in police files, dropped them at the mouth of El Pianista Trail. Altitude there stands near 1,200 meters. Cafe owners across the road watched the duo adjust laces, snap a quick photograph, and step onto the damp clay path. Blue trotted behind. Climbers that morning recalled passing no other hikers heading up. Weather stations archived temperatures near 20 degrees Celsius, with humidity climbing. The ascent typically takes under 2 hours. Photos recovered later showed Chris and Lisanne smiling against ferns taller than themselves, time-stamped around 11:40. At 12:30, they reached the wooden cross, clouds curling just below eye level. From this point, the official trail ends. Blue reportedly turned back toward town, but the women continued north, following a faint line of flattened undergrowth. Between 1338 and 1339, Lisanne's phone attempted 2 calls to the Dutch emergency number 112. Cellular records confirmed no connection. 9 minutes later, Chris's device dialed 911, Panama's service line. These attempts occurred near the ridge, where sparse canopy sometimes allows signals to leak through. No further outgoing activity is logged until late afternoon, suggesting movement into deeper cover. Back in Boquete, nothing yet appeared unusual. The host family expected the hikers to return before dusk, as they had on previous outings. Meanwhile, clouds thickened over the Cordillera, and afternoon rain began its routine descent. The two friends, now beyond the cross and beyond mapped ground, had unintentionally stepped from tourist itinerary into uncertainty. Cloud built quickly once the ridge faded behind them. By 1400 hours, steady drizzle covered the narrow footpath, turning packed clay into slick ribbons. The two travelers moved downhill, expecting a loop that would circle back toward Boquete, yet each bend only revealed thicker foliage. The unmarked descent they had chosen was sometimes used by Ngabe farmers, but no fresh machete cuts showed recent passage. Visibility shrank to fewer than 20 meters. Birds fell silent, leaving only water tapping on giant philodendron leaves. Around 1500 hours, Chris paused to note coordinates on her phone. Dense canopy blocked satellites, and the screen displayed nothing but a spinning icon. The pair pressed on, stepping over moss-coated logs and shallow ravines. At 1540, a third emergency attempt left no connection, recorded later as an unanswered call of 0 seconds. Investigators would later calculate that cell towers stand on opposing ridges. Reception in the valley exists only in scattered pockets, where terrain and weather align for brief moments. By late afternoon, the slope steepened sharply. Mud slides here during wet season carve sudden drops of several meters. Witness marks on surviving photographs show deep boot impressions, and one image of Lisanne's left leg smeared with brown clay up to the knee. The camera timestamp reads 1622. Behind the hikers, rainfall grew heavier, typical for early April when Pacific moisture collides with Caribbean air over the continental divide. Sunset in the cloud forest arrives early. At 17:30, ambient light fell below safe hiking levels. Chris's organized nature now met a landscape offering no landmarks and no clearable path back uphill. She likely suggested conserving battery because the next logged phone action does not occur until the following morning. Without firelighting gear, the women sought natural shelter. Investigators believe they selected an overhanging boulder beside a tributary of the Rio Culebra, an area reachable from the ridge within 6 hours of cautious descent. Night temperatures near 1,200 meters hover around 15 degrees Celsius. Wet clothing would have intensified chill. Rain persisted through the night of 1 April into the dawn of 2 April. At 6:51 that morning, Lisanne's phone again tried 112. A minute later, another attempt followed, both unsuccessful. The pattern that emerged over subsequent days shows calls clustered in late morning or early afternoon, moments when shafts of sun briefly pierce the canopy and batteries warmed by pockets regain minimal charge. Food reserves dwindled quickly. By noon of 2 April, the bananas and cookies were likely gone, leaving only stream water for sustenance. Decision paths narrowed: climb back up treacherous inclines or continue down toward a river whose roar grew louder with each kilometer. They chose the latter, perhaps reasoning that settlements often sit near water. The jungle, however, broadens rather than clears as altitude drops, and side ravines funnel travelers away from the main valley floor. Throughout that second day, footprints showed increased slipping, evidenced by longer skid marks photographed at 1310. Insects already gathered at exposed skin. Swollen bites appear on Chris's forearm in the final daylight image of 2 April. Dusk closed again without outside contact. Back in town, their unused beds would soon alert the host family. But inside the rainforest, only the muted rush of floodwater registered the girl's presence. Before dawn broke over Boquete on Wednesday, 2 April 2014, the Miranda guest house remained unnervingly quiet. Kitchen noises usually started by 600 hours, yet the room reserved for Chris and Lisanne showed neither movement nor the faint blue glow of early phone use. At 6:30, the host mother knocked, received no answer, and opened the door. 2 neatly made beds, folded rain jackets, and untouched passports greeted her. By 800 hours, she phoned the local substation of the Policía Nacional. Sergeant on duty logged the missing persons alert at 8:45. 9 minutes later, the file landed on Detective Maria Luisa Guerra's desk. Guerra, then 36 years old and the most experienced investigator in the district, had navigated 4 previous wilderness incidents. She recognized the narrow time margin before tropical weather erased tracks. By 1000 hours, she requested a helicopter from the National Aero Service and radioed volunteer guide Efraín Pilo Ortega in nearby Bajo Mono. While officials mobilized, family members in the Netherlands noticed a more subtle red flag: no overnight text message. At 11:15 Central European Summer Time, Chris's mother sent a short inquiry that remained unread. Within 3 hours, both sets of parents began coordinating with the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, triggering consular channels. Back in Panama, first ground teams reached El Pianista trailhead at 11:30 local. The taxi driver who had dropped the women 1 day earlier provided a precise timestamp from his logbook: 10:13 on Tuesday. Guerra mapped that data against average hiking speeds and concluded the missing persons had likely passed the ridge by 1300 hours. Searchers concentrated on the marked ascent, believing the pair might still be above the cross. Blue, the town's wandering dog, was found sleeping near a cafe, showing no sign of exertion beyond ordinary. Early afternoon rain arrived at 14:20, grounding the requested helicopter for the rest of the day. Ground crews pushed until 1700 hours, covering the official path twice with whistle calls every 50 meters. Nothing answered but tree frogs. At dusk, Guerra suspended operations, conscious that untrained volunteers risked injury on slick slopes. Thursday, 3 April, expanded efforts began at first light. 2 tracker dogs from the K-Site unit swept the ridge. A faint scent patch near the wooden cross faded within 30 meters. Ortega advocated for probing beyond the lookout into Ngebe territory, arguing that inexperienced hikers sometimes follow the downhill guide tree markers meant for farmers. Resources, however, remained limited. 34 people, 2 drones with short battery lives, and 1 helicopter finally cleared for an afternoon flight. Aerial observers noted fresh landslide scars on the northern face, evidence of rainfall measuring over 100 millimeters during the previous 48 hours. No bright clothing or reflective gear caught the eye. Meanwhile, call records quietly accumulated on telecom servers. Between 7:45 and 10:50 on 3rd April, 6 more emergency dials originated from Lisanne's handset, each registering at 0 seconds. International attention intensified by Friday, 4th April. Dutch newspapers printed side-by-side portraits of the travelers and questioned local preparedness. Consular staff landed in Panama City that night, scheduled to reach Boquete the following morning with specialized search cameras and a promise of broader funding. For Detective Guerra, the clock now measured not merely hours lost, but clues dissolving under the relentless cloud forest rain. Funding arrived with the consular team on Saturday, 5th April 2014, yet deep inside the Cordillera, another timeline unfolded. By sunrise that day, Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon had been in the forest for 4 full nights. Rainfall totals at nearby meteorological stations reached over 150 millimeters, a volume that swelled every creek feeding the Rio Culebra. The women's phones, once routine tools for hostile Wi-Fi, had become their only lifeline. At 0500 hours on 5th April, Lisanne's Samsung powered up for the final time. Call logs record a last 112 attempt lasting 0 seconds, followed by permanent shutdown at 0500. Investigators later traced battery depletion to repeated cold exposure and the near-constant search for network. From that moment forward, all outbound efforts relied on Chris's iPhone. Morning light on the ridge breaks slowly because peaks shadow the valley floor. Around 900 hours, Chris managed another 911 dial. Again, no connection. Analysis shows the handset now sat below 1,000 meters elevation, likely in a narrow gorge where the river twists sharply east. Terrain maps confirm that signal reaches the area only when atmospheric ducting bends microwave bands across the divide, an unpredictable event of perhaps 2 seconds duration. Food had been exhausted since the previous afternoon. To maintain energy, the travelers probably drank directly from side streams, a choice with short-term benefit but long-term risk. Scratch marks visible on later recovered clothing suggest repeated climbs over sharp basalt outcrops, forcing detours that consumed calories and daylight. Camera images from 5th April, time-stamped between 11:20 and 13:15, show angled shots of river boulders, a torn plastic bag tied to a forked twig, and a close-focus picture of Chris's left shoe where the sole had begun to peel away. While the pair struggled below the canopy, surface search efforts expanded above. Detective Maria Luisa Guerra deployed 30 additional volunteers supplied by the Dutch contingent. 2 drones equipped with thermal lenses launched at 1440, but returned blank screens. Afternoon convection raised ground temperature uniformly, hiding any warm signatures. Guide Efrain Ortega persuaded command to insert a 4-member team downstream at an old Ngebe planting site, reachable only by rope lowering from the helicopter skid. The drop was canceled minutes before liftoff when thunder cells closed airspace. Sunday, 6th April marked the women's 6th day missing. Chris's phone, activated at 10:53, remained on standby for 8 minutes and logged 2 incorrect personal identification numbers. Specialists later inferred that cold, damp fingers made accurate entry difficult. A 3rd emergency dial lasted 0 seconds. Battery indicator showed 1 red bar. That afternoon, the camera recorded its final daylight photo. Mist swirling above a rock ledge, no humans in frame. Shadows at the edge of the shot placed the sun roughly west, confirming orientation toward the Caribbean slope. Heavy rains returned overnight into Monday, 7th April, grounding helicopters once more and forcing ground units to withdraw to safer elevations. By then, the girls' footprints, fragile in muddy soil, had begun to wash away. On telecom servers, another silent record appeared at 11:56. Chris's iPhone restarted, registered one more wrong code, then went dark for the remainder of the day. For investigators piecing the timeline months later, these sparse electronic pulses would serve as a metronome of dwindling options. Late on Tuesday, 8th April 2014, the forest entered its usual blackout, yet the Canon camera carried by Lisanne Froon began to pulse with artificial light. Between 100 and 400 hours, device memory logged 90 consecutive flashes. Most frames captured darkness pierced by reflective droplets. Others revealed jagged bark, tangled aerial roots, or the faint sheen of moving water. One image, time-stamped 129, showed the back of Chris Kramers's head, hair matted, and a dark fluid tracing her left temple. Another, taken at 2:16, displayed two plastic shopping bags stretched between forked branches, as though marking a spot. Investigators later enlarged the sequence and noticed that some flashes fired upward, illuminating canopy, while others pointed toward the ground, hinting at deliberate surveying rather than random trigger. Technical review in the Netherlands determined that the camera mode had been switched from automatic to manual exposure, an adjustment requiring familiarity with settings. That fact aligned with Lisanne's known interest in photography. Battery level went from half to empty by the final shot at 3:59. After the last flash, the lens cap remained off. No further images were ever taken. While those stark photographs accumulated unseen inside the memory card, surface operations resumed at dawn. On Wednesday, 9th April, a temporary base camp advanced 3 kilometers beyond the wooden cross. The farthest organized teams had ventured. Guide Efrain Ortega led the push, following faint notches he himself had cut during earlier coffee harvests. Within 2 hours, the group stood at a ridge overhanging the Rio Culebra Gorge, a location later plotted less than 1,000 meters from where telemetry placed the final phone pings. Thick mist, however, obscured the valley floor, and steep wet clay forced a retreat by 1400 hours. Back in Boquete, families from the Netherlands began daily press briefings at Park Central, urging officials to widen search radii and to keep helicopters aloft despite cost. Detective Maria Luisa Guerra filed requisitions for additional rope teams and night vision gear, citing the possibility that the missing travelers were sheltering under canopy too dense for aerial sighting. Paperwork crossed desks in Panama City, but procurement lagged behind tropical weather that shifted hourly between sunlight and sheets of gray water. Thursday, 10th April produced only 2 brief activations of Chris's iPhone, at 10:48 and at 11:09. Both times, a wrong personal identification number was entered, locking the device for several minutes. Specialists would later explain that after 10 failed entries, the phone extends lockout intervals, suggesting a user under stress or with impaired dexterity. No emergency dials occurred. Battery strength was already critical. The final cluster of electronic life arrived on Friday, 11th April. At 10:51 that morning, the iPhone powered up, rolled past the lock screen, likely via fingerprint recognition, and immediately searched for network before shutting down forever. Search calculators marked this moment as day 11 since the hike began. On the ground, rescue teams had yet to uncover a single belonging, footprint, or shred of fabric. Above them, layers of rain-washed leaves kept the night's violent flashes a hidden chronicle, waiting for discovery that would not come until early summer. The rainforest offered no further electronic trace after Friday, 11th April 2014. From that moment, the investigation depended on human eyes, dogs, and aerial scans. Yet the vast green maze kept its quiet. Over the weekend of 12 and 13, April search teams logged more than 100 man-hours along 3 separate spurs of the Rio Culebra, marking each explored sector with fluorescent tape. Afternoon downpours shredded many of the markers overnight, leaving freshly cleared corridors hard to relocate the next morning. By Monday, 14th April, logistical strain became evident. Helicopter flight time had surpassed 20 hours, the limit of the initial fuel allocation. Detective Maria Luisa Guerra filed an urgent request for extension, citing dense canopy and the futility of ground sweeps alone. Approval arrived 2 days later, but with a reduced quota. Only one sortie daily, weather permitting. Guide Efrain Ortega used the lull to revisit oral maps passed down among Nieve elders. He proposed entering the valley through an older coffee mule track near Alto de la Estrella, a detour adding 3 hours of uphill slog before any downhill progress could begin. Command agreed, hoping to reach untouched gullies, yet timed out the mission after a single mudslide forced the team to crawl on hands and knees. They advanced scarcely 600 meters before being recalled for safety. International support, strong during the first 2 weeks, gradually shifted focus as new events elsewhere drew media bandwidth. Dutch news outlets still ran daily tickers, but fewer front-page pieces. Families in Boquete extended lodging contracts and rotated relatives to keep someone always on site. They drafted a checklist of private resources: thermal drones, long-range microphones, lightweight rafts, and emailed proposals to Guerra. Practical limits, especially transport weight under wet tropical conditions, whittled most ideas down to morale boosters rather than tactical gains. Rainfall statistics underline the challenge. Between 15th April and 1st May, the Cangilones gauge registered over 200 millimeters, nearly double seasonal average. Every fresh torrent rearranged sediment on riverbanks, covering old boot prints and potentially moving belongings downstream. Hydrologists from the Universidad Tecnológica advised pausing bank searches until water levels stabilized, afraid that personnel wading in turbid channels risked being swept off footholds. On Friday, 2nd May, the official operation reduced its active footprint. Daily manpower shrank from 40 to 12, dogs were returned to their home kennels, and remaining volunteers focused on structured grid walks rather than wide exploratory loops. Guerra kept the case file open, planning targeted sorties during predicted weather breaks. She stored the call log printouts and enlarged trail maps in a plastic bin beside her desk, within arm's reach, but no longer spread across the operations table. May passed into early June with little alteration: brief helicopter circuits at dawn, quick patrols to known waypoints, and evening status emails that increasingly read, "No new findings." Family members, however, refused to vacate the rented guest house. Each sunrise they placed fresh flowers at the El Pianista signboard, a quiet statement that the search, though officially scaled back, remained alive in private determination. Then, on Saturday, 14th June, a shift occurred far from any planned patrol route. An Ngebe woman, collecting oranges along the Rio Culebra during a rare lull in rain, spotted an unfamiliar blue backpack resting on a dry rock slab. The discovery location lay roughly 8 hours on foot from the closest trailhead, beyond all mapped sweep zones completed so far. She lifted the pack, noted its surprising cleanliness, and began the long walk toward the nearest police radio post, unaware that her find would restart a stalled investigation and redraw every hypothesis logged since early April. The Ngebe farmer, Maria Santos, by local registry, reached the Bajo Culubre police outpost shortly after 1700 hours, on Sunday, 15th June 2014. She carried a cobalt blue day pack slung from a stick and wrapped in a palm frond, careful not to disturb its contents. Officers radioed Detective Maria Luisa Guerra in Boquete, reporting the serial number stitched beneath the pack's top flap. Guerra recognized the digits immediately. They matched the description filed by Chris Creamers's parents 10 weeks earlier. Within 1 hour, the detective boarded the region's lone Bell helicopter, accompanied by a forensic technician and guide Efrain Ortega. At 19:30, inside the Boquete substation, technicians opened the backpack over a stainless steel tray. Despite recent flooding, Every item lay clean and dry. First came two smartphones, a black Samsung and a white iPhone, both switched off, batteries long depleted. Next, Lisanne Froon's silver Canon camera appeared, lens cap missing, but body intact. A sealed plastic wallet held 23 American dollars, 32 Panamanian balboas, and both Dutch passports, edges unwarped. Two pairs of sunglasses, a small first aid pouch still zipped, and two sports bras folded into tight squares completed the inventory. Guerra noted the absence of any mud or leaf matter. The pack looked as though it had been placed, not washed, onto the river rock. Early speculation inside the station touched on three possibilities. The women had survived long enough to set the pack down deliberately. A third party had arranged the items, or the river had transported the bag in an improbable dry pocket. Guerra chose protocol over theory. She logged chain of custody tags, then powered each phone under laboratory supervision. Both devices displayed familiar spring wallpaper photos before fading to empty batteries. Data extraction rigs were prepared for the morning. Dawn on Monday, 16th June, saw a fresh deployment. 41 searchers, now funded by renewed Dutch grants, moved toward the coordinates provided by Santos. Rainfall the previous night measured only 5 millimeters, granting a narrow weather window. Ortega led a unit upstream first, believing strong currents could not have carried the backpack against flow. Another team swept downstream to test alternative drift theory. Guerra, meanwhile, secured aerial imagery. Infrared still offered little under thick canopy, but high-resolution optical lenses captured every exposed boulder. Progress came upstream at 13:57. A volunteer from the Red Cross spotted denim fabric on a sandy shelf, roughly 14 kilometers north of the backpack site. The garment, later confirmed as Chris Kremers's shorts, lay inverted, legs folded inside one another, hem entirely above the current line. No rips or discoloration suggested violent removal. Investigators photographed the scene, bagged the item, and cut saplings nearby to mark coordinates for returning teams. That evening, Guerra briefed relatives and media in the municipal hall. She emphasized that two significant belongings had surfaced within 24 hours after weeks of silence, an interval too precise to ignore. Theories multiplied: opportunistic theft, staged placement, natural sorting by receding floodwater. Families requested Dutch forensic divers, and arrangements began to fly them in within 72 hours. While forms were filed and flights booked, local rumors rekindled. Stories of hidden mine shafts, wayward prospectors, and spirits guarding the valley. Guerra kept focus on tangible clues: one backpack dry against logic, one pair of shorts folded with intent, and a map now stretching farther downriver than any prior grid. Darkness closed over the Cordillera once more, but for the first time since early April, the investigation possessed fresh momentum, propelling teams toward sections of the Rio Culebra that the original search plans had never reached. Daybreak on Tuesday, 17th June 2014, found three specialist teams, dispersed along a 10-kilometer ribbon of the Rio Culebra, each armed with new waypoints plotted overnight. Rain eased to a mist, permitting divers from the Dutch Royal Constabulary to slip into pools where boulders shaped natural eddies. Within 90 minutes, the first hard evidence emerged. A lone boot, size 41, floated against a swirl just below a narrow cascade. Inside, still cushioned by a gray hiking sock, rested 5 small bones of a left foot. Serial numbers on the leather matched receipts Lisanne Froon had emailed to her father before departing the Netherlands. Forensic protocol paused the field search while technicians photographed the find from multiple angles. The boot sat wedged against a log, several meters above normal dry season watermarks, implying it had been deposited during recent floods rather than carried for weeks. 20 meters downstream, sift screens captured a fragment of denim web belting and a torn piece of medical tape marked with the date 1 April. Both artifacts were catalogued and air-dried under tarpaulins. News of anatomical remains reached Boquete Command Post by 1100 hours. Detective Maria Luisa Guerra, ordered an immediate widening of the perimeter, but terrain dictated patience. Sheer canyon walls forced teams to shuttle clues by rope lift to prevent loss in current. At 15:42, a second alert sounded. Searchers had recovered a pelvic crest from human skeletal structure on a gravel bar 8.5 kilometers below the boot location. Preliminary metric indicated adult female, consistency with Chris Kremers's medical records. No tool markings or major fractures appeared visible to the naked eye. Over the next 7 days, staggered discoveries continued as water levels receded. On Thursday, 19th June, a humerus shaft surfaced near a bend locals call Tres Cebas. On Saturday, 21st June, 2 phalanges and a portion of tibia were spotted sun-bleached on an exposed sand tongue. By Wednesday, 2nd July, the total count reached 30 bone pieces, distributed across a corridor slightly longer than 10 kilometers. Mapping showed no neat sequence. Items alternated between upstream and downstream pockets, defying a simple wash-down narrative. Laboratory analysis commenced in parallel at the Institute of Legal Medicine in Panama City. Isotope ratios confirmed origin from European diets, supporting identity links to Chris and Lisanne. Microscopy revealed no knife incisions, bullet spall, or heavy impact compression. Notably, calcium surfaces on Chris's fragments presented a chalky white patina, typical of prolonged sunlight, whereas Lisanne's retained soft tissue residue under fingernail beds. Forensic ecologists suggested staggered exposure periods. One set of remains might have lain above water longer than the other, or decomposition timelines differed because of microhabitat variables such as shade and insect access. The neat condition of belongings recovered earlier now stood in sharper relief. Investigators revisited the backpack site, collecting soil cores that showed zero textile fibers in surrounding sediment, implying placement rather than drift. Equally perplexing, the folded shorts bore no biofluids, despite proximity to skeletal material found upstream. Guerra consolidated these contradictions into a briefing sent to Panama's public ministry on Friday, 4th July, recommending classification as unresolved with accidental factors yet to be excluded. Families in the Netherlands, receiving copies through consular liaisons, voiced concern that the evidence painted a more complex scene than mere wilderness misadventure. By the time night settled on the Cordillera that Friday, the river valley had relinquished bones, clothing, and electronics. It had yet to provide the one element investigators most needed: a coherent sequence explaining how 2 organized athletic travelers became scattered traces along an isolated Panamanian watercourse. Summer turned to early autumn before authorities issued any formal conclusion. On Thursday, 31st October 2014, Panama's public ministry released a 28-page summary describing the fate of Chris Kremers, age 21, and Lisanne Froon, age 22, as most likely accidental, linked to disorientation, terrain hazards, and severe weather. The report cited steep ravines, sudden cloudbursts, and the fact that both students had walked beyond a maintained trail. Yet internal footnotes acknowledged unresolved anomalies: the untouched electronics, the folded denim shorts, and calcium differences between bone sets. Detective Maria Luisa Guerra signed the technical annex, but added a personal comment in her log. Evidence does not align neatly. Context remains fragmented. Families received advance copies 2 days earlier through Dutch consular staff. On Sunday, 2nd November, they held a press meeting in Amersfoort's town hall. Parents thanked Panamanian volunteers, yet rejected the word accidental as definitive. They cited phone activity days after the last daylight photograph and raised questions about possible third-party involvement. Dutch media aired comparative segments showing backpack placement diagrams alongside river flow models. Public opinion polls later indicated 63% of viewers believed outside interference cannot be ruled out. Meanwhile, practical outcomes unfolded in Boquete. By mid-December, municipal workers installed bilingual warning boards at the El Pianista entrance, Large red lettering advised hikers not to proceed past the wooden cross without licensed guides. Rope handrails were added along the first kilometer, funded in part by a crowdfunding initiative started by Lisan's former volleyball club. Guide Efrain Ortega noticed a gradual shift. Visitors asked more about weather windows, fewer attempted solo treks. He kept a laminated copy of the girls' itinerary in his day pack, showing it to groups as a caution. Forensics continued quietly. In February 2015, bone fragments shipped to the Netherlands underwent micro-CT imaging at the University Medical Center Utrecht. Radiologists confirmed no high-velocity trauma. Entomologists cross-referenced insect scoring with regional molting calendars and proposed a staggered exposure timeline of between 8 and 12 weeks, supporting the earlier hypothesis that parts of the remains reached sunlight long after initial disappearance. These findings circulated within academic journals but did not prompt case reopening. Online debate, however, never settled. By 26 March 2016, the second anniversary, dedicated forums contained hundreds of geo-referenced maps, translated witness statements, and spectral analyses of the night photographs. One independent researcher claimed to detect a human silhouette in frame 87. Another argued the shape was a palm frond. Detective Guerra, aware of the discussions, saved select posts in her digital archive, labeling the folder Public Theories. She still visited the trailhead each 1st of April, leaving a white orchid near the signboard. A decade later, on Monday, 1st April 2024, Dutch newspapers ran retrospective pieces under headlines such as Cloud Forest Enigma Endures. Chris and Lisan's families marked the date by planting 2 beech saplings in a community park. Local children attached handwritten tags, Vivir es Explorar and Altide in ons Hart. The small ceremony underscored a wider legacy: improved trail signage across Panama, new emergency repeater towers on isolated ridges, and a global reminder that modern devices, however advanced, cannot guarantee safe passage through wilderness. Thus the story settles into records, a blend of coordinates, weather charts, bone scans, and unanswered calls echoing against rainforest cliffs. It remains neither closed nor fully open, a cautionary chronicle of 2 friends who chased a sunrise beyond the mapped line and left behind a riddle still carried in the rustle of cloud forest leaves.